everyone. So I would like to first thank the organizer, the Peninsula Foundation, for giving me this opportunity to share the perspectives on a topic that that is dear to me on trade, logistics, and how the climate change discussion is impacting countries like Sri Lanka that depend quite a lot on ocean resources for livelihoods. So I'm going to talk about the port and shipping sector. When it comes to climate change, why port and shipping sector matters to Indo-Pacific, and especially to Sri Lanka. To give you numbers, to give some perspective, basically ships carry over 80% of the world trade, and 60% of that trade passes through Indo-Pacific. And that is why Indo-Pacific is so important, not just for Indo-Pacific countries, but for the world as well. Although compared to other modes of transport, shipping is emissions that the shipping sector contributes to is relatively low. But what is worrying about the shipping sector and the maritime transport sector is compared to many other sectors, the emissions have been growing despite a lot of pressure put on the shipping industry, despite a lot of regulations and rules coming into existence. The greenhouse gas emissions of the shipping sector has been growing over the last decade, and it has not seen a substantial reduction. And there are some predictions that if steps are not taken to really address this issue, that the emissions from the shipping industry can increase by 50% by 2050. So this is a concern for the world and also for the Indo-Pacific. And there is a lot of pressure on the industry by the governments and by the international agencies to adopt energy-efficient shipping technologies, and especially to transition from the conventional fuel to alternative fuels. So in this context, it is so important for the Indo-Pacific countries like Sri Lanka to really understand how a country like Sri Lanka that depends quite a lot on port and logistics sector contribute to this discussion and conversation and also benefit from it. Because this transition into a sustainable maritime transport offers both an opportunity and a challenge for countries like ours. To give you one example how this conversation is actually happening at the global level and the measures taken to really be compliant with the requirements and the climate targets. There is, at COP26, there was a declaration signed by 22 countries to establish zero-emission green corridors for maritime transport. This is between two or more ports, how the countries, the public sector and the government and the countries can come together to really establish zero-emission green corridors. What this would mean is that when these kind of technologies and investments happen, some ports may be able to, the ports that succeed will be the ones who can keep really investing in the necessary infrastructure and technology to be able to be part of these green corridors. There has been resistance quite a lot by the industries to actually adopt these technologies and to go on a sustainable path simply because it is costly. For example, to give you the costs, transitioning from conventional fuel to alternative fuels is said to can cost 5 times more for the industry. So obviously there has been resistance, but what we need to understand is there is growing pressure on the governments and the industry to adjust. There is direct pressure coming to the industry. We're saying that the shipping industry should change, but there is also indirect pressure that is coming from their clients. Because most of the manufacturing firms in the developed world, especially where the public pressure is growing, is expected to be compliant, not just with greening their manufacturing facilities in their countries, there is an expectation that they should bother about the carbon footprint of their entire supply chain. And this matters for many big multinational corporates that has very diversified, especially geographically diversified supply chains, to prove that they are actually working to reduce the carbon footprint of their entire supply chain. Which means that shipping industry, ports, and every other actor in that supply chain will also get pressure to say, okay, you need to get your act together and reduce the carbon footprint. But now, what does this mean? That this means it's not only the shipping industry that can do this transition, the ports have a role to play. What is the role the ports have to play? When the shipping industry converts to ships that can and able to use alternative fuels, it is the ports that will have to do the investments in supplying these alternative fuels, in bunkering, from LNG to electricity to any other technology and any other source that will reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. That means if you want to be really part of this sustainable transition, ports have to invest in infrastructure, especially energy infrastructure, to supply to these ships, and those ports will only be able to be part of these green corridors. So the next challenge for countries like Sri Lanka is to really think, when we are investing in infrastructure, are we thinking seriously about this? Because this is so important for us to contribute to the world meeting the global climate targets, but at the same time, our ability to trade and prosper depends on that, because despite the resistance, despite the slowness of this transition, it is going to become, like everybody says, there is an existential threat to human species and this earth. So as it grows, the pressure will grow for everybody to adjust. So are you going to be a first mover? Is a very critical question we want to ask ourselves. Or are you going to wait until everybody else is done? Then this is something Sri Lanka has been so good at, just always missing the bus, always not being the last mover and last person to take the right steps. So for Sri Lanka, which has 4 international ports, and 25th largest container port in the world, which actually did 7.5 million TEUs in last year, 80% of which is transshipment cargo, which means Colombo Port survives because of everybody else in the region, not because of its own cargo. So 80% of which is transshipment cargo, and it's very important that the Colombo Port also realizes that for us to continue to be a preferred destination and for ships to want to call us. And not only that, for a long time, Sri Lanka wanted to graduate from being a mere transition hub to a maritime logistics hub. That means companies, manufacturing firms want to put their link Colombo to their supply chain by getting value-added industrial services. But that is only possible if we are really taking into consideration the pressure on these firms to reduce their carbon footprint. And that is the concern that I have, partly because Sri Lanka is expanding its capacity. To what extent Sri Lanka is considering these factors when it is investing in new terminals. We are about to really build 2 new terminals, one by government of Sri Lanka and one by Adani of India. All of these have gone through, these terminals investments have not gone through a competitive bidding process. And Sri Lanka's procurement to this date does not recognize green procurement. We have a procurement guideline, which was done in 2006, which looks at only economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, and not the entire value for money concept from a holistic point of view. And the focus on green procurement, environment-friendly procurement is still very low. And it is a huge concern when these kind of terminals and infrastructure is built without going through a competitive bidding process, through unsolicited proposals, which there is very little transparency. And the government not having put a request for proposal, listing out the terms and conditions of these investments is a huge concern. And in our part of the world, there is so much malpractices, misuse and abuse of authority, and also weak institutions and regulations. In this context, these investments that happen is seriously questionable. And this is the governance and poor planning are two of the biggest challenges countries like Sri Lanka has to overcome to really to benefit from the opportunities that arise from this sustainable transition, especially because we are building infrastructure new, we are adding capacity, and that allows us an opportunity to really invest in the right technologies. Sadly, not having the right governance frameworks and institutions and regulations is a major concern. So I will stop there, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.